There is a Lancaster County Amish farmer whose property shares a fence line with a conventional chemical farm that sprays glyphosate. He has not argued with his neighbor. He has not filed a complaint with the county or put up a legal dispute. He did something more effective and aligned with the principles that have kept his community functional for 300 years. He planted a 40-foot windbreak of native shrubs and trees. The windbreak filters the drift and builds a biological soil buffer. The windbreak provides habitat for beneficial insects, and every spring when the neighbor drives his sprayer past, he sees a thriving garden. Neither man says a word because neither man needs to. This is about what happens when your neighbors do the opposite of you. The person implementing these systems is not on a private island. They are in a neighborhood, surrounded by people who have not changed. The Amish have been navigating this for 300 years, embedded in communities that do not share their values. The HOAs, the neighbors who complain about beehives, and the officials who cannot find your systems in the code, they are all real. The Amish response is not confrontation or political action. It is something that costs less energy and produces better results. Demonstration. Demonstration is the choice to let the system's results do the persuading. Results are visible, verifiable, and resistant to argument. The Lancaster County farmer with the chemical farm neighbor did not need to convince his neighbor to stop spraying. He needed to continue producing food of exceptional quality and health from land that his neighbor's practices did not damage. The windbreak is not a political statement. It is a practical solution that makes the demonstration possible. His garden produces. His food is excellent. His neighbor drives the sprayer past the windbreak every spring and sees the garden producing and does not need to understand why the garden produces to be affected by the evidence that it does. This is the Amish approach to every situation where their practice conflicts with their neighbor's practice. They manage the conflict at the practical level through windbreaks, buffer zones, and drainage management, and other physical tools that reduce or eliminate the impact of the neighboring practice on their own operation. They do not manage the conflict at the ideological level through argument, advocacy, complaint, or legal action. Unless the practical approach fails, and the harm is severe enough to require legal remedy. Even then, the legal action is the last resort rather than the first response. Let me describe the specific practical tools the Amish use to manage the most common neighbor conflicts. The chemical drift problem. Every property adjacent to conventional agriculture faces the possibility of pesticide or herbicide drift. The conventional response is complaint, legal action, or application to the state agriculture department for spray buffer enforcement. These responses are slow, uncertain, relationship damaging, and often unsuccessful because the regulatory framework is limited. The Amish response is the windbreak. Native shrubs and trees planted along the fence line, densely enough to provide a physical barrier, with root systems deep enough to biologically process any chemical that reaches the soil. Cost, approximately $200 to $400. The windbreak is a permanent physical solution that reduces or eliminates the drift problem without requiring the neighbor to change. The HOA restriction problem. Many properties in suburban areas are subject to covenants that restrict visible alternative practices. Vegetable gardens in the front yard, beehives, rainwater collection containers, rooftop solar. The Amish response is to move the practice to where the restriction does not reach, making the restriction unenforceable. The beehives go on the south side of the garage. The rainwater barrel goes in the side yard. The vegetable beds go in the back. The Amish do not waste energy fighting the restriction. They navigate around it. The water rights conflict. Properties with springs or shared drainage features sometimes face conflicts over water use. The Amish response is to design the water management system to be entirely self-contained, to avoid any drainage modification. Building relationships with neighbors provides early warning and informal resolution before issues become legal matters. The zoning and building code conflict. This is the conflict that most directly affects people trying to implement the more complex systems described in this series. the earth tube that does not fit the code, the masonry heater that requires 20 acres, the root cellar that requires a permit the department cannot issue. The conventional response is frustration, complaint about regulatory incompetence, or abandonment of the system. But there is another way, the Amish response. They build under agricultural exemptions, keep structures below permit thresholds, or use plumbing codes for qualifying systems, all while providing extensive documentation and safety records. The Wisconsin v. Yoder Supreme Court decision of 1972 is the most significant Amish legal victory in American regulatory history regarding religious freedom and education. The decision established a framework allowing religious communities to seek exemptions when laws substantially burden their practices without a compelling state interest. While not directly applicable to building codes, the strategic approach is preparing documentation, building relationships with officials, and framing the issue as legitimate historical practice. The earth tube has a documented history going back to the Roman Empire. The masonry heater dates to the Bronze Age, the root cellar to agriculture's birth. These are not experimental systems. They are the oldest, most proven building technologies in human history, predating the current regulatory framework entirely. The building official is simply facing a technology that needs accommodation through the same variants and alternative compliance pathways that every code already contains. The most reliable approach is this: build the relationship before applying for a permit. Attend township meetings and know the official by name. Understand that their concerns are primarily about liability. Bring performance data, monitored installation records, and engineering analysis to demonstrate safety and code compliance. Ask for a pre-application meeting. In the context of a relationship, this is a conversation, not an adversarial review. Conversations produce the solutions we need. The Amish water rights conflict. Properties with springs, streams, or shared drainage features sometimes face conflicts with neighboring landowners over water use and management. The Amish response to these conflicts is designed water management that avoids impact on neighboring properties. When the system is self-contained, taking only what falls on the property and affecting only what flows through it, the water rights conflict rarely arises. The first flush diverter and the cistern collect what falls on the roof. They do not divert stream flow or intercept surface runoff from neighboring properties. They do not affect downstream water availability in any measurable way. The conflict does not arise because the system was designed to avoid it. The zoning board strategy I have seen work most consistently for alternative practices is the demonstration presentation. You invite the zoning board to see the system in operation at a property where it is already installed and producing results. The demonstration changes the frame from theoretical risk to empirical evidence. It moves the decision from a permit form to a visible reality. The demonstration is the Amish persuasion strategy applied to the regulatory context. Not argument, evidence, visible, verifiable, experienced evidence. The nuisance complaint problem involves neighbors who object to roosters, beehives, or compost smells. This conflict feels personal and discouraging. The Amish response is to understand the neighbor's actual concern, address it, and build the relationship that makes the concern feel heard. Moving chicken housing farther from a bedroom window is a practical solution that addresses the actual concern without eliminating the chickens. Providing information about honeybees combined with a jar of honey as a gift addresses both the information deficit and the emotional register. The jar of honey strategy represents the Amish approach in its most concentrated form. It is the physical expression of the relationship principle. The honey is evidence that the practice produces something beneficial. It is the demonstration rather than the argument. That experience changes the emotional register from abstract threat to concrete benefit. The argument does not change that register. The honey does. Community building strategies make these tools work. The honey jar works in the context of a relationship, not as an impersonal technical solution. The Lancaster County farmer's windbreak works because the neighbor knows him, has exchanged labor, and has received surplus vegetables from his garden. They have built enough relationship over years to maintain a functional working relationship, even in the absence of agreement about farming practices. The relationship was built before the conflict arose, not in response to the conflict. The Amish farmer did not introduce himself to his neighbor when the spray drift became a problem. He introduced himself when he moved to the property. He participated in the local farm bureau meetings, even though his farming practices differed from most members. He was present at the township meetings about road maintenance and drainage, because the community decisions affect his property, regardless of his farming style. He attended the auction when his neighbor had to sell equipment and helped pack the truck, even though his neighbor had no idea what help he would one day need from the Amish farmer's windbreak. The relationship was built through consistent presence and reliable contribution in the shared spaces of community life over years before the windbreak became necessary. The windbreak was possible, socially and practically, because the relationship preceded the need for it. If he had planted it as the first interaction after the drift problem appeared, it would have looked like an accusation. Because the relationship preceded it, it looked like what it was: a practical solution by a neighbor who is managing his land well. This is the community-building sequence that the Amish practice consistently, and that most contemporary alternative landowners skip because it feels indirect and slow. Show up in the shared spaces of community life before you need anything. The township meeting, the volunteer fire department event, the local agricultural fair, the school board meeting even when you do not have children in the school, the road cleanup day, the community emergency response team. Be present and contributing consistently without expectation of specific return for a period of years before any issue arises. By the time the spray drift problem appears or the HOA complaint is filed, you are not a newcomer to your neighbor. You are a community member who has been present and contributing for years. The conflict is addressed between people who know each other. That context changes everything about how the conflict is resolved. The Amish community has been practicing this sequence for 300 years. They show up, they contribute, they are present. They do not require their neighbors to share their values or practices in order to be good neighbors. They require only that the relationship is maintained with mutual respect, so conflicts are resolved through practical solutions rather than legal action. Let me describe one more aspect: the willingness to absorb some cost without complaint for the sake of maintaining the relationship. The Lancaster County farmer accepts that some small amount of drift still reaches his soil. He does not demand that the last 5% be eliminated. He manages it through soil biology and accepts the small residual cost as the price of maintaining a functional relationship. This willingness is not weakness. It is the strategic calculation that a functional relationship is more valuable than perfect technical protection. Most disputes between neighbors over property management practices escalate beyond what the original dispute warranted, because neither party is willing to absorb any cost without complaint. The conventional chemical farmer who feels accused by his neighbor's windbreak planting becomes defensive. The Amish farmer who feels violated by the chemical drift demands complete remedy. The dispute escalates. The relationship is damaged. Both parties have worse outcomes than if either had been willing to absorb a small cost without complaint. The Amish willingness to absorb small costs is not passive. It is the expression of a long-term calculation that the relationship is more valuable than winning the specific dispute. It is the same calculation that the community mutual aid system is built on. You contribute more than you immediately need when the community is healthy, because you understand that the community's health is the source of everything. You absorb the small cost of your neighbor's practice when the practice is manageable, because you understand that the neighbor whose practice you have accommodated is the neighbor who will help you when you need help. This is not a calculation most people in contemporary American culture are prepared to make. The culture optimizes for individual rights and property. The Amish optimize for relationship, community, and mutual dependence. These are not the same optimization targets, and they produce not the same outcomes. The $1.3 million calculation for the complete Amish system is achievable only in the context of the community network that supports it. The barn raising is only possible because the relationships that make it possible were built before the barn was needed. The windbreak is only possible because the relationship that makes it non-confrontational was built before the spray drift appeared. The relationship is the foundation under the foundation. The root cellar rests on the relationship with the land. The community network rests on the relationship with the neighbors. The long-term systems rest on the long-term relationships. And the long-term relationships rest on the willingness to show up, to contribute, and to absorb small costs without complaint. Drop in the comments the most challenging neighbor situation you are navigating in your alternative land management practice right now. The HOA, the spray drift, the nuisance complaint. Because the responses to those comments will be the most practically useful content this series has produced. The people in this audience who have already navigated similar situations will respond with the specific practical solutions they found. The Amish farmer with the windbreak has been dealing with spray drift for 5 years. His neighbor's spray drift has not gotten worse. His relationship with his neighbor is functional and occasionally collaborative. The windbreak works. The relationship works. The demonstration continues. The honey jar keeps going over the fence every August. That is the complete picture, not just the systems, the relationships that make the systems sustainable. It all starts with showing up, before you need anything, in the shared spaces of community life. That is the education in community the Amish have been delivering for 300 years without a single textbook or a single classroom. Show up, contribute, demonstrate, the rest follows.